Well, no one. We've just been seeing scenes, on your show here. I know this is going on in my constituency and across the country. No one wants to see these strikes happening. Absolutely not. Not the teachers, not the kids themselves, but importantly, nor do the teachers. Nor do the teachers. The government has known that there were risks of strikes since last summer. And the government at no point sat down with the unions to try and look at the space for a compromise that could have avoided these strikes. Now, it's quite staggering that in the time since then, we've had 5 different Secretaries of State for Education. You'd normally get 1 and they would be in post for years. We've had 5 just in the last year, a revolving door of chaos in the Department for Education. The first of those was Nadhim Zahawi, who we now know was more focused on issuing legal threats to journalists who are asking legitimate questions about his tax affairs when he should have been focusing on negotiating these strikes. Well, he wasn't doing the job. He wasn't doing the job he should have been doing. A Labour Secretary of State for Education would have sat down with the trade unions and sought to find a way through this. You can't get a compromise, you can't get a negotiation if you don't get round the table. So the very first thing they should be doing is talking.
Keegan's had them in the office twice in a month.
But she's refused to talk to them about pay, which makes it very difficult.
Lots of other matters which are also important to teachers.
But she's come up with no answers to any of those either. Now, if you look at what is the root cause of what's happening here, in the last decade, we've had the worst decade for wage growth since the Great Depression of the 1930s. Teachers' pay, like many other workers' pay, has gone down in real terms. We've now got inflation at something near a 40-year high. It's just below the very highest it's been in 40 years. And teachers are being offered, a real terms, pay cut. Now, these are the people that were looking after our kids during the pandemic. They kept going to work while many other people were not going to work. These are people who have got the best interests of children at heart. It is incumbent on the government to sit down and talk to these people. But really, with all of these problems we're seeing, I've had trouble getting in today because the trains are on strike, the buses are on strike, we've seen the nurses' strikes, we've seen the ambulance strikes. This is a real Tory winter of discontent. But the root cause of it is we've got a government that has failed to grow the economy. And if you can't grow the economy, you can't give people the wage rises they want to see.
30 billion quid, where's it going to come from to pay all these public sector workers?
Well, it can only come from growing the economy. If there was a Labour
government...
it does take time, but they've had 13 years now. They've had 13 years now, and what we've just seen, the IMF published some figures yesterday. The British economy is shrinking when all the other economies in the G7 major economies in the world are growing.
Are often wrong, aren't they?
We're actually growing slower than Russia, and Russia is subject to major international sanctions.
That's a projection. The IMF is often wrong.
They've had 13 years in power now. Labour was in power for 13 years before that. The economy grew twice as fast under Labour than it's grown under the Conservatives. We had the chairman of Tesco's recently come out and say there's only one player on the pitch when it comes to economic growth, and that's the Labour Party with our Green Prosperity Plan to invest in the good green jobs, the new technologies of the future. If the government had focused on growing the economy, we wouldn't be in the mess that we're in now.
So you'd be paying all of these pay rises that are being asked for, you would be paying all of them?
No, and I'll have to be clear about that, because when that election eventually comes, if there is a Labour government elected on the Thursday, everything isn't sorted on the Friday. We will inherit a mess like nothing that's been seen for a generation, and it will take time to fix that. What we would do is sit down with the trade unions and talk about the long-term prospects, and there will be hard proposals on the table. One of them is that we would end the tax break for private education. That will raise £1.7 billion that we would look to invest in 6,500 new teachers to ease workloads in the schools, but also increase the number of extracurricular activities that parents want to see their kids do that really helps those kids develop as a rounded individual further down the line. So a very different approach from a Labour government. Instead of that, we've got the Tories passing new laws this week that are actually threatening to sack teachers, sack nurses. The last thing we need is for them to make this crisis worse, and yet that's what the government's doing.
Talk to me about Dominic Raab. Allegations by people that work for him in double digits who say that he is a bully. That's the allegation against him. And at least one of them said that they had suicidal thoughts. What should be happening while that's being investigated? Well,
first off, like you, I've read those reports, and it's very hard to read, isn't it? Because nobody going into their place of work should be subject to bullying and intimidation that leaves them in a situation like that. And as you say, there are dozens of people now that have come forward with allegations. I think this really now goes to a question of the Prime Minister's, he promised us when he came in to Downing Street just a few months ago, integrity and professionalism and accountability. Well, what did he know about these allegations about Dominic Raab, and why did he appoint him? And if he didn't know then, and he hasn't made that clear to us, then why on earth is Dominic Raab still in post today? With this number of allegations, of this level of severity, the normal thing would be to suspend somebody while they are fully investigated. And yet Dominic Raab remains in post. If he really is the kind of bully that these allegations are claiming, then he is still being let into the Ministry of Justice every day, and he is still able to carry out these actions against junior members of his staff, senior members of his staff, who are finding it difficult to cope. In the interests of safety, Rishi Sunak should suspend Dominic Raab while the investigation goes ahead. But I'm afraid Rishi Sunak is too weak to do that, just like he was too weak to sack Suella Braverman when she breached national security, just like he was too weak to get rid of Nadhim Zahawi when these exposés about his tax affairs came out.
Sunday.
He took weeks to do that. We all knew what was going on, and the Prime Minister was stood there shrugging his shoulders and saying he didn't know. Well, the rest of the world seems to know. He's saying due process again, isn't he? He's hiding behind a cover, because what you do in a normal...
You're the Shadow Justice Secretary. I mean, you know about law and order in this country. Surely people are innocent until proven guilty.
Due process doesn't mean that if you suspend somebody, it doesn't mean that you know that they have committed the offence. It means that the level of severity is so great that you're removing them from the workplace in the interests of the safety of everybody else who works there. The investigation then goes ahead. If he was really relying on due process, he would actually suspend Dominic Raab. He's not. He's too weak to do that. We've seen it again and again with the whole number of scandals that have come out about various members of his cabinet. If he really wants to show he's committed to integrity, he will suspend Dominic Raab while these investigations go ahead. If Dominic Raab is then cleared, well, then he can come back. But if not, Dominic Raab would need to go.
Are you really worried about the safety and security of the people that work with Dominic Raab?
Well, you just told me somebody felt suicidal. Now, when things have got that bad and a colleague gets... Well, somebody said they feel suicidal. If it was just one person on their own, perhaps you could say, you know, it's one word against another, but we know there are dozens of allegations now. And it's that level of severity that means that the Prime Minister, if he really meant what he said about integrity, would act. Due process, I've not always worked in politics. I used to work in publishing. People were suspended if there were serious allegations about them, and if they were then not proven to be the case, they would come back to work. But the interests of safety in the Ministry of Justice, everybody has the right, everybody deserves to go to work and feel safe and not bullied and not intimidated. The severity of the allegations is so great, Mr. Raab should be suspended.
Thank you for joining us on the programme. Much appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you, Kate.